Your brain didn't forget what you read. It never actually learned it in the first place. You know when you finish a book, or even just a really solid article, and someone asks you about it like 2 days later, and you just freeze, like you know you read it. You remember sitting there. You remember the cover. You might even remember the vibe of it, but when you try to explain what it actually said, your mind goes completely blank. And you're sitting there like, I literally spent 4 hours on this. Where did it go? That feeling is so weirdly universal, and nobody ever stops to think about why it happens. And the reason it happens has almost nothing to do with your memory. It's actually about how your brain processes information in the moment you're reading it. And once you see what's really going on, it kind of changes the way you look at every book you've ever picked up. But there's one specific thing your brain does while you're reading that basically guarantees you'll forget almost everything. And most people have no idea it's even happening. Here's where it gets weird. When you're reading something and it makes sense to you, your brain registers that as learning. It goes, oh, I understand this sentence. Cool, next one. And that feeling of understanding is so satisfying that your brain just moves on. It doesn't stop to actually do anything with the information. It just collects the feeling of getting it and keeps scrolling down the page. So what you're really doing when you read isn't learning. You're just recognizing. You're seeing ideas, going, yep, that makes sense, and moving forward. And recognition feels identical to understanding. Like, your brain literally cannot tell the difference in the moment. It's like watching a cooking video and feeling like you know how to make the dish. You followed every step. It all made sense, but hands you the ingredients and you're standing there like, wait, what was first? That's exactly what's happening when you read and forget. You experienced the information, but you never actually built anything with it in your head. And that's just the surface. Because the real problem shows up somewhere you probably wouldn't expect. But here's the part nobody talks about. The way most people read is basically passive consumption. Your eyes move across words, your brain decodes sentences, and that's it. There's no friction, and your brain needs friction to form actual memories. This is the thing. Your memory doesn't work like a hard drive. You don't just save files by opening them. Your brain decides what to keep based on how hard it had to work to process it. If something comes in easy, your brain flags it as unimportant. It's like, oh, that was effortless? Probably don't need to store that. Which is completely backwards from what you'd expect, right? You'd think the easier something is to understand, the better you'd remember it. But nope. Your brain literally throws away the stuff that felt smooth. That's why you can read an entire chapter, feel great about it, and then retain basically nothing. The ease was the enemy the whole time. Think about it like this. You probably don't remember what you had for lunch on a random Tuesday 3 weeks ago. But you definitely remember that one time you burned your hand on a pan or spilled coffee all over your laptop. Those moments had friction. They demanded your attention, and your brain kept them. Reading, for most people, has zero friction. So your brain treats it like background noise. Honestly, bro, if this is clicking for you right now, just drop a subscribe real quick. I break down stuff like this all the time, and I think you'd be into it. And this is where the whole thing flips. Because here's what's wild. The things you do remember from books, they almost always have one thing in common. They connected to something you already knew or something you were already struggling with. Like if you're going through a breakup and you read a line about attachment, that line sticks. Not because it was written better, not because you highlighted it, but because your brain had a place to put it. It had an open slot. There was a question already living in your head, and that sentence answered it. That's the difference. When information lands on top of a question you're already holding, your brain locks it in. But when you're just reading to read, with no specific question driving you, your brain has nowhere to file anything. So it just lets it dissolve. It's like trying to hang a coat on a wall with no hook. The coat just falls. The hook is the question. Without it, nothing sticks. And most people sit down to read with zero questions in mind. They just open the book and start going. Which means they're basically reading with no hooks on the wall. Every idea just slides right off. Now think about this for a second. You've probably had the experience where you reread a book you read years ago, and suddenly it hits completely different. You're catching things you swear weren't there the first time. But they were. The words didn't change. You changed. You had new experiences, new problems, new questions sitting in your head. So now your brain had hooks. Now the information had somewhere to land. Same book, same words, completely different retention. And that tells you something kind of uncomfortable. It means what you get out of reading has less to do with the book and more to do with the state of your mind when you read it. Two people can read the exact same page and one person remembers it forever while the other forgets it by dinner. Not because one person is smarter, but because one person had the right question loaded up and the other didn't. So the weird part isn't that you forget what you read. The weird part is that remembering was never really about reading in the first place. It was always about what your brain was already reaching for before you opened the page. The books didn't fail you. Your brain just didn't have a reason to hold on.